Nice. I hope you can all hear me. Cool. I still see people coming, and that's awesome, but we have to start. And first of all, I'm super excited that we got an almost full cinema. Maybe next year I will tell them, look, put us in the cinema one for the panel. And I think you all made an amazing choice. This is definitely the main event of the whole conference. Yeah, and then we have 4 kind of events after that. Every panelist here still hasn't had the talk yet. Yeah, so please attend their talks after being impressed with them today, of course. So let's start. My name is Vladyslav, and I'm a curator for the security track at the conference, and it's my 4th time, I think, at the conference. I started at About You more than 5 years ago, and the first time About You hosted this conference, I applied as a speaker, and then I applied every next time and became the curator. And yeah, this year I wanted to do something a bit different for a panel, because last year I also had a panel. It was a bunch of security people talking about security. It was also quite interesting, but I wanted to get a different perspective. And what you see here is why I wanted to get an interesting perspective. The topic for today is why haven't we fixed all the vulnerabilities yet? That sounds like an easy question, but it's also a very complicated question. And what I want to achieve, or at least try, is to get different perspectives from our panelists. Why do we see this trend? So I'm not sure if you know, but I will just say there is a common vulnerability enumeration database. It's basically, if you find a juicy vulnerability in some product, you submit it there, then you put that on your CV that you found it, and it made it to the database. And this is how it progressed over the years. Well, you see from 2009 to 2016, it's like pretty stable, but then it goes wild. And I don't know about you, I really do not like this trend. Every year it goes up, up, and up. And it says 2023 year to date is only 7,500, but honestly I don't think so. I think that the data is not complete yet, and I'm pretty sure the graph will go even higher this year. So what I want to discuss today is why. And yeah, maybe now let's give the chance to our panelists to introduce themselves. So let's start with you, Katerina.
Hello everyone, my name is Katerina. I come from Adeva, a talent marketplace for connecting tech consultants with companies worldwide. I've been in the industry for a while now. I am in a leadership role, so my angle here is most likely to discuss why we haven't fixed the vulnerabilities from a management perspective. What can we do to improve that? Curious to see how this discussion unfolds, because I'm by no means a security expert, but I think it will be very interesting.
Hi everyone, I'm Nazneen. I've been with Thoughtworks for 11 years. Thoughtworks is a software consultancy. And I started off as a developer, worked on a few client projects, all retail, and then, delved into the security domain. Currently, I'm playing a role of a lead security consultant, leading the cyber efforts for InfoSec, and have played quite a bit of a role to shape and lead the AppSec program for our internal IT operations. So very, interested to listen and engage with everyone about vulnerabilities. So,
I'm Tobias. Senior Product Manager at Metro.Digital. So we are the internal product company of the Metro AG with services in more than 20 countries. And with the product management, I'm the guy who is prioritizing often user stories with business impact higher than web vulnerabilities, but how and why we're going to discuss later, and I'm happy to be invited today.
Yeah, hello, my name is Jan. I'm a consultant for Holisticon, an IT and management consultancy here in Hamburg. My main role in customer projects is back-end development on the JVM, so Kotlin, Java, Spring Boot, all this stuff. So my perspective on these issues would be how do we deal with dependency, vulnerabilities, Docker images, that kind of thing.
Great, and let me introduce our final panelist, and it's ChatGPT. And let's ask it to introduce itself. And if you don't want to read, I will put it on the text-to-speech thing.
Hello, I'm ChatGPT, a virtual assistant based on OpenAI's GPT-4 architecture. I'm here to help answer questions, provide information, and occasionally crack a joke if you'd like. How can I assist you today?
So I gave it some instructions as an input, and it's supposed to be a world-leading expert in vulnerabilities and an aspiring stand-up comedian, so let's see where that goes. But anyways, yeah, so we will ask some questions to ChatGPT, but I'm of course more interested in the perspective of our panelists here, and as you heard, we have very different perspectives. We have someone who's prioritizing issues within the company, we have a security expert, we have someone from the management, we have someone from the development. So let's see. What I'd like to start with is basically, where does a vulnerability begin? I mean, obviously it begins when a developer writes bad code. But maybe, Nazneen, can you tell us what is the life cycle of a vulnerability? Where does it start? Which stages does it go through? And where does it end?
Okay, so my experience, we say a vulnerability starts when a developer codes, but it starts, I think, way ahead when we are even thinking about the design, when we're thinking about what are we piecing together from an integration perspective. So from analysis, it could get introduced to move to development. When we go to the QA phase, we could also get to see certain vulnerabilities there. Very often you'll see vulnerabilities also in the operate monitor phase, where it's pushed to production, and then we see some new findings in the world. So it goes through that phase of vulnerability of detection or introducing in the code base, from design to coding to operation and monitoring. But I would like to also discuss like how do you fix it, which will be an interesting phase of that it comes back to. But yeah, that's how I have seen it unfold.
Okay, in your perspective, at what point does a vulnerability is a vulnerability considered fixed? Where does it basically die, and the counter on the graph goes down by 1?
Ideally, it is fixed if we decide as the team if it's remediated, or we say transferred, like I don't, this is nothing to do with my product, I will transfer it, or we accept it, but that conversation for acceptance has to happen, then it can be decided as fixed. If that is not happening, we are not even talking about remediation, no acceptance, no transferring, that is when it will hang. So hang around like a zombie. So.
Okay, I see. Maybe, Katerina, what parts of the vulnerability lifecycle do you have experience with? Or in your experience, who participates in the lifecycle of vulnerability? Who is it? Is it security engineers or developers, management? Who takes part in it?
I think the biggest problem is by, we separate the responsibility, and we say this is the responsibility of the security team, or the security team, these are the people that are the only ones who need to care about the security. I think we need a more holistic approach where we take ownership of the security of our product. We know that it's part of the feature, it's not something that is handled separately. So I would say not prioritizing security at the start is management being involved into participating in this life cycle. And then we have developers who decide to write bad code just because they're pressed by deadlines or something else is more important. That creeps in, just like that tech debt creeps in. We have another point within the life cycle. Multiple people at multiple stages, but the most important thing here that I see as a pattern is kind of shifting the responsibility towards the security team when it's actually something that we should own as a team. It should be part of every step of the way. It should be a requirement together with everything else that we develop, because it's just part of who we are, and we need to ship secure code, we need to ship quality code. Yes, sometimes we should make an exception, we should speed something up because that's required, but keeping the debt that we have left behind us so that we can circle back to it. So it's more of a kind of holistic general problem, I would say, not only a single department or a point in the process.
So what I got is that you believe everyone should participate and take ownership, but we still have that maybe little sin of shifting that responsibility to the security team. So let's maybe ask the audience, do you believe that everyone needs to be responsible for fixing vulnerabilities? Can you raise your hand? Okay. And which one of you actually participated in either finding or fixing a vulnerability? Oh, that's quite a lot, okay. All right,
practicing
cool.
what they preach.
Yeah, definitely. So, now let's maybe talk about some differences in this life cycle that we discussed. Maybe Tobias and Jan, can you tell us whether it's the same life cycle for fixing of a vulnerability in the industry that you're coming from, and maybe tell us a bit about the industries where you're coming from, and how do you think it can change from an industry to an industry?
Yeah, sure, I can start. So I have a slightly different perspective on this because as a consultancy company, or me as a developer, we build individual software for customers. So we do not have products out in the... It's not that I write perfect code, but if I make a mistake, this won't up in this chart you showed us, because we handle this internally. So for me, it's more that we recognize CVEs in products we use, open source libraries we use, and then it's... So the life cycle starts basically by recognizing there is something we should possibly do, analyze the risk of fixing it, and we won't fix the vulnerability itself, we will just fix the impact it has on our application. So, which is basically the new release of an enterprise framework or a library that we then implement.
Okay, understood. So, yes, there is a difference. Basically, the vulnerabilities that end up here in the CVE database, let me go back to this, that's different from maybe what we are dealing with. Also at About You, we don't necessarily, the software that we produce and the vulnerabilities that we have in our software will not end up here because we are not a software supplier, let's say. And yeah, that's exactly the point that Jan made. And Tobias, how is it for you? Does your do your vulnerabilities end up in here or not? And what's your perspective on this?
I guess our vulnerabilities are not here in that chart. And first of all, I would like to agree with you, Katerina, that the responsibility should be within the product teams that are also building the software, not shifted somewhere to the SREs. Therefore, our teams have support from SREs inside their teams, but we are not shifting the responsibilities. The reason why I'm saying that our vulnerabilities are mainly not in that chart is that right now I have never ever seen any vulnerability in our softwares for the countries that was really in an escalation, that someone is raising the hand to the top management with real pressure, and that also the press got aware of that Metro is then somehow going down. The common life cycle is mainly that our developers on their own find the bugs. We have a Jira ticket system for that, and in the best case we have only one developer and one bug ticket, and in the end it's going to be fixed. We have transparency about the bug tickets, and we also do often showcases either within the company or also with the countries, where we invite them to see what have been the recent changes, where we may be really fucked up, to say them, yeah, we had here a breaking change. This may be the reason why they have called us at 3 in the night, because some depot couldn't work to pack up the goods. But mainly most of the things are handled internally without any concerns for the real end customer.
Okay, so you can still end up on the news for having a vulnerability, but it's not going to be in the database. Okay, understood. And in the meantime, while you were talking, I asked ChatGPT, where does the responsibility lie? And it says that typically it's in the software vendors and developers, system administrators, and security teams. Katerina, it disagrees with your point. It doesn't mention anything from the product leadership or management. And I also disagree with this, because this is not including enough. I mean,
it's just like with gender bias. It has been learning on a data set which is kind of emphasizing the importance of having a separate team that deals with security. Well, in reality, it's kind of maybe a smaller group that thinks it's a broader issue that should be addressed on multiple levels. So don't take it for granted.
Okay, but why do you think that kind of statistically, so if we think that ChatGPT learns from what is statistically probable, why do you think kind of management or product leadership was excluded from here?
I think the common understanding between everyone really in the industry is that you have developers who should solve the problems and code. You have QA that needs to do the testing. Then you have security experts that should handle the security. Managers need to manage. In reality, it's much more complex than that, and most of the highest performing teams are kind of involved in the whole life cycle. Developers need to know more about product, more about the problems they're solving, more about the customers that they're serving, and more about the vulnerabilities they're putting out there, because they would affect the customers. Business and product and management, they need to know more about all of this as well, because it's affecting their customers at the end, and it's costing them money. You mentioned at the beginning, or in the intro of the panel, that it costs much more to catch a vulnerability later on in the process. But nobody is actually thinking about it, because for us it's kind of risk management. We don't spend time on risk management. We spend time on the problem that is pressing us now, without thinking about how it will affect the business or how it will affect the development team at a later stage, because you might need to work for months to solve something that could have been easily prevented with just, I don't know, one condition in the code. And these are things that are not considered because of this separation of responsibilities. And I think it's something that it's a mindset change that we need. And it starts from a smaller movement, I guess, so that's why it hasn't come to ChatGPT yet.
Okay, I see. You made a good point there about the cost, and taking that into consideration when prioritizing something. Nazneen, how much does it cost to fix a vulnerability?
And just going with data that from this applied measurement, software measurement, it's actually called out at the release phase. It's actually 640 times what you would do, or how much you would spend at the development phase. So it's that high when it's already released and sent across. I think at the development phase also it's at 10x, and then it moves to quality analysis, which is something like 64x, and then becomes 640x. So it's very costly. And just to adding on to what Katerina shared here, the reason why software vulnerabilities come in so later, or it's not coming up in this data, because it's always thought of a cost revenue. It doesn't help in increasing your revenue with many of our, your products. With the products like retail, your customer feedback or your customer needs are put in, ahead. That's giving us money. That's giving the product money. Whereas security will be like, oh, only if we happen to have an incident and a breach, that is when people will be like, okay, we need to fix it. So it doesn't immediately add to your revenue. It's in fact always said of a cost center, which it's a little annoying, but that is why it doesn't come up in conversations from management. And if we start getting data about like 640x times fixing it, and we take a governance forum and start highlighting that data, that is when it will shift, is what I believe.
That is a pretty crazy figure, 640 times. I think that is the good argument that can be brought up. And maybe Tobias, when you prioritize tasks within the company or the team that you're working with, where do you put vulnerabilities, and how important is it compared to the, let's say, business impactful features that bring money to the company versus security stuff that, well, maybe will not cause a loss right now, but later on can cause 640 times loss?
It depends. There's not that golden rule how to prioritize or deprioritize bug tickets. In general, we have the approach that it depends on the severity level of the bug ticket. If it's really a big thing that needs to be fixed as soon as possible, then also developers just drop their pen and directly go to the bug ticket. Therefore, that will be done immediately, no matter how late or how early it is. Also, developers are aware of that. If there are major things or things where we as a product have dependencies to other products, where maybe we are only consumers of an API or of a service, we can just put more pressure on different teams, especially if we have bought in some licenses from any CMS system, where we cannot do anything and an update or fixing that bug would cost us 7 digits. There are also the reasons why we sometimes just deprioritize a bug ticket, because we cannot just update the complete CMS overnight. That would then maybe take 2 development teams for a week to update the prod environment or the testing stages, migrating all the countries. That would be then really a big issue. And then we have the costs analyst. What is easier? Is it just letting it open if we do not expose any customer data, and it's just a bigger bug? Or do we really need to fix that?
Okay, understood. So since the beginning, I realized that it's my favorite answer. It depends. This means that like a very complicated thing is coming, and it is complicated. There are so many reasons why certain issues are deprioritized. Sometimes, only like those critical things, they get into the backlog, but you have lower severity stuff that can be hanging there forever, and it can go from one year to another until it is chained into something that is, well, 1,000 times more expensive to fix. Okay, Jan, as an experienced developer, do you think developers bear the most responsibility in fixing an issue? Because in the end, it goes on your plate. You gotta sit down, you have to hit the keyboard, make a commit, and so on and so forth. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I would say most, of course, because we already agreed that everyone is responsible. But you're right, in the end, as Tobias said, we have the bug, we prioritize it, I'm the developer, so I'm going to fix it. So yeah, this is my responsibility. Maybe the figures, how much does this cost? So what we, as developers, we don't want an exploit in the news, and then the manager comes in and says, are we affected? And we say, we don't know. So what we do regularly in the backend team is we try to carefully select which dependencies we get into a system. We set up a repository where we can just check, are we affected by, I don't know, Log4j version 2. And we set up regular version update systems. So most of the time, before I even notice that there could have been a vulnerability, some nightly update job already moved it out of the way, and when someone puts their head through the door and asks, are we affected, I say, no, not anymore. But this is not for free, of course. So the question, how much does it cost? It's an invest we do. If you're used to doing it, you can do it pretty easily, but still, these are numbers. And typically, in the first phase of the customer project, in the first 2 or 3 sprints in the beginning, we have time to set up all this build infrastructure, scanning, everything. So this is, if you're used to it, it doesn't really count anymore, but still, yeah, and I agree, it's much better to do this in this phase than with a factor of 600 later.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe I want to ask the audience, how is it in reality? Because we have so many people here. Can you raise your hand if you believe that your company fixes vulnerabilities at the later stages of the software lifecycle or at the development? So if you think your company fixes them way too late and it should be doing that earlier, can you raise your hand? Quite a bit. It's like, I don't know, maybe 30% of people raised it. You are doing so well. I should have raised my hand. Sorry. I see. Cool. So since we are running a bit low on time, I wanted to ask each of our panelists what are some effective ways to encourage all the stakeholders in the vulnerability process to kind of do a better job, fix more vulnerabilities, and maybe what advice can you give to everyone in the audience to take away with them from this panel today? Katerina, let's start with you.
Well, I think for starters, we need to educate people more on the importance of security, maybe with this data that we have shared here today, the fact that it costs 600 more times to fix something at a later stage than it does at the beginning. And I think these numbers resonate with management. It's harder to convince a manager to dedicate time to security if they don't know the actual impact it has on the business. So I would start here. Maybe people who are individual contributors in their teams who don't feel like the management prioritizes security enough. You could speak up. You could share this data with your managers, and they would share it with their managers, just to create a more of that type of culture within the company where everyone cares about security. And then make it a requirement. So don't dedicate separate time to security, make it a requirement in everything that you do, and a mindset within the company. So if you work on a feature, security is something that is on the checklist of the definition of done or whatever you do before you release something.
Nice. What I heard in between the lines is scream loud enough until this becomes very important. Okay, Nazneen, what can you say?
I would call out, like, if we are on the team working from analyzing the feature to analyzing the product to bringing it to a closure, figure out why this certain security person, if you say, is nagging to get this requirement in place, or why is the team calling out for doing threat modeling. The severity and impact, if we can highlight that to management, to your product owners, about why this particular, I'd say, secrets leakage control is required, in a sense of what's the reputational risk, what's the financial risk you're bringing to the company, that will make a difference. So bring up that points on point, connecting it with the business value, it'll start making a change. Especially if to not increase the vulnerabilities, think about getting I would say acquainted with threat modeling. There are many ways to do quick threat models, and that includes the stakeholders too. So we don't have to do it as a group of developers coming to a room and doing a threat modeling session. That can bring in the POs because they have business expertise. So get all the stakeholders, QAs, the infrastructure consultants, the analysts, everyone involved, XDs, and do a threat modeling session would be one way to reduce the vulnerability counts to increase in your product. So yeah, that would be one thing from my side.
Nice. Threat modeling is a great topic, but we need another panel for that. So maybe after the talk, catch Nazneen and ask how to do that and what role does it play in this process. Tobias, what do you have to say on this topic?
that have been already really cool advices, and you already said including stakeholders, and based on that, my advice would be create a failure culture and add transparency on that. We as a human being learn much more from failures that have been done inside the company than only from the big success stories where we are celebrating ourselves in some intranet or somewhere else. If you have that kind of transparency that errors and failures can happen, and if you have knowledge sharing sessions among the complete company even, so on a real high level where you also invite your CEO, CSO, whatever kind of organization you are, and maybe even stakeholders, to show them, hey, here we had a major issue, that's why we paused the feature XYZ for 1 week. With that transparency, also stakeholders might say more often, okay, we trust you that we are doing the right thing and we may wait for the feature 1 more week.
Great. And Jan, last but not least, how about yourself?
No, the final words. I already made some remarks on transparency in a different sense, so we have to know what's going on. What's also important is, in the past, I won't say any names, it might have happened that we implement feature, and then we have to do this security audit 2 weeks before they can go live, and then we somehow work around the checklist that we provided. So that's not a good idea, so that's not my final advice. My final advice would be to, and a security expert and talking to management prioritizing will help, treat security from day one and continuously test it and evolve it. So when you have this audit later, you just say, yeah, we're already done.
Great. I think this is a great idea to do it earlier. Then you have that audit and it's clean, you know, and you're 2 weeks ahead of schedule. I really like that. So let's ask our machine friend, what does it think? I'll put it on the text-to-speech. Or I can just summarize it, that's faster. So, prioritize, I think we mentioned that. Educate staff, I think that was mentioned quite well in the previous talk by my colleague Felix, to kind of gain that knowledge within the security, to scale your application security better. Because it is very hard to scale security by just relying on the security team. Normally companies grow way faster than the security team can grow. And that is a very good point. Automation, well, we didn't mention that, but well, that's why we have this thing. Incident response plan, that's interesting. Be prepared for breaches. Tobias, that's probably your point, yeah? Failures can happen, this is normal, and it's not, I think also Nazneen, you mentioned it's not when, it's not if, yeah, but when it's gonna happen. So definitely a good point. Backup, I think everyone knows about that, and seek expertise. The closing joke. Why did the software go to the doctor? Too many security holes. All right. Cool. So let's give a round of applause to our panelists for